Okay, I am with Nora Mayer today, and she is actually a friend from high school. She was best friends with my sister, Trish, my younger sister, and we have just continued to be friends. And we are both members of the same club, as probably you are if you're watching this. Um, the Angel Mamas Club, I guess you might call it. But I am just going to turn it over to Nora to just give a little introduction about herself.
Hey, well, hi and welcome. My name's Nora Mayer and currently living in Centerville, Utah. I've been married for 24 years and I am a mom of 7 kids, and I almost always include my angel baby whenever I talk about my family, just because I feel like she's still with me in my thoughts and my memories. I was trained as a teacher and started being a full-time mom when I had my second daughter. I like all things outdoors. I like hiking, and I'm part of a food group where we eat each other's houses once a month. It's kind of like a book club, but we really just talk about food and eat food, and it's one of my favorite things. And I also like launching my kids. I have 2 that are already out of the house, and it's almost surreal. Maybe I haven't quite processed that, but I still have little kids at home, and that's quite a joy as well.
Okay,
And I'm excited to do this.
awesome. Well, I appreciate you. Appreciate you being vulnerable and sharing your story. I want to just first ask, did you have an idea of what motherhood would look like for you before you and James began your family?
I'm going to say yes to this. I'm the oldest daughter of 9 kids. And so I watched my mom do a whole lot of hands-on mothering and hands-on management of our family. And I had a whole lot of ideas myself. Just being interested in children and graduating with a degree in education, I felt like I really wanted to just be a part of my of the lives of the kids that I would have, but also I can say yes, but then also I can say no. Now, as a mom who's raised some kids, I now know that I didn't quite know exactly what I was getting into when I had kids. But I also knew that I wanted a big family, and that it was my one goal.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell me what life was like for you before, or I should say during your first pregnancy. What did life look like?
Okay, so James and I had been married for a couple of years, and I had been on some pretty intense birth control. So it took a long time for us to get pregnant, like more than a year and a half of trying. And so even when we conceived and we were just so thrilled, I had a lot of breakthrough bleeding, and I spent about 10 weeks on bed rest right at the very beginning, where we were trying to save the pregnancy. I had a long-term sub at the school. Just every single week I would write some lesson plans and send them, and I spent a lot of time watching movies and sitting in my bed. And when I was finally off of bed rest at about 20 weeks, I went back to school to teach 4th grade with the plan that I would just continue teaching right up until she was born. And during that time, it was so fun. We had 5 baby showers. Who has 5 baby showers? I had 5 baby showers. So much support from my neighborhood, my ward, my school family. I was just the second daughter of my parents to have a child, so it was highly anticipated. It was a highly anticipated baby, and it was fun. We were both working full time, and then we'd meet up for doctor's appointments and ultrasounds, and it was a great time. Just really enjoyable, not necessarily stressful, but stressful that we didn't know what we were getting into, but we were excited for it.
Definitely. So tell me about the days leading up to your baby's birth.
I felt her spirit so strongly. We knew she was a girl. We had named her Charlotte. We knew that she just seemed to be like around. Her spirit and her presence was really exciting up until, let's see, the day before. I remember it was my very last day teaching, because it was a Friday, and my due date was that Monday. And so I just kind of planned to just leave the sub plans, get the long-term sub. I wouldn't be back in until after I had the baby. And so I was driving over to Target. I bought some yellow pajamas and some peanut butter M&Ms. And driving home, I had this most intense contraction. I had never felt anything like it. But again, being first time mom, I didn't know what it was. And I just thought, well, that was weird. And then she was just so active all evening. I couldn't even sleep. It was probably about 3 a.m. where she just, and I thought she had just finally fallen asleep, and I finally fell asleep too. And then the next morning, I woke up with a lot of contractions, Braxton Hicks combined with contractions, but nothing was very consistent. And so I called up the hospital, well, my doctor's office, and they said, well, have you felt her move much? And I hadn't. They said, come in, let's get checked. And so we just drove over, and I'm like, if I haven't felt her move at all. And I'd heard that, oh, you just don't hear much movement once you're in labor. I'm like, oh, I must just be in labor. So we got to the hospital. They checked me into a room. The nurse came in with an ultrasound machine and just kept scanning, saying nothing. And again, I didn't think anything of it at all. And scanning. And finally, she just said, I don't quite see a heartbeat. I'm going to go get the doctor. And it didn't even dawn on us, nothing, that there was anything wrong. And then when the doctor came in, he did the exact same thing, scanning. And finally, he just spoke up. He said, look right here in this little cavity, that's where her heartbeat should be, but there isn't a heartbeat. We don't know what happened, but looks like you're going to have a stillborn baby. And I'd heard of stillbirths. My good friend from a girls' camp I had worked at, she had had a stillborn baby. And I know she'd had a full-blown funeral because this baby was 32 weeks and fully developed, was a baby. My body immediately went into shock. My blood pressure dropped. All the contractions that I'd had been having stopped. And I just asked him, are you going to send me home with a dead baby inside of me? I don't think I can do that. And they said, we'll take care of you. We'll put you into labor as soon as you're stable. And so that's what happened. It was a couple of hours before we had enough courage to call our families. We were just so devastated that this was happening to us at that moment. We did end up calling our family, and about the same time that they induced labor. And that was, about noon or 1. And because I'd been in shock, because I really wasn't in labor, the Pitocin took a long time. And she was born about 9 o'clock that night. And by that time, all of my family was there. All of James's family was there, just waiting in the hall, just waiting and waiting. And when she was born, there really wasn't a dry eye in the room. The doctor was crying. The nurses were crying. We were crying. And she came out absolutely gorgeous, but just not living. She weighed 7 pounds, 10 ounces. She had really bright red lips, and that usually happens in stillbirths where their blood has pooled at the places where it's really close to her the surface of her skin. So her lips, her nails, and she was absolutely beautiful. There wasn't anything really wrong with her. The doctor took a long time searching the placenta, the cord, the lining of it, and everything was fine. It wasn't wrapped around her cord. The one thing they did notice is there was a lot of blood that was in the amniotic fluid, which is kind of an indication that a placental abruption had happened. But typically when there is a placental abruption, there is a whole lot of pain and a whole lot of bleeding. And I, of course, didn't have either of those. And then there was a little bit of swelling that was in the lining of the uterus, which might be an indicator for some kind of infection, but it was completely inconclusive. So no real reason why it happened, but just sometime between the day before, and I'm thinking it was, the middle of the night when I finally got to go to sleep, when she finally stopped moving, that's probably for whatever reason, she died.
Can I ask you, I'm going to veer off from our questions a little bit. How
Yeah.
did you reconcile not knowing why? Did you just you accept, or is it
was
something you thought a lot about?
Yeah, for sure. In some ways it was it was okay that there was absolutely no reason that it happened. I feel like if there had been something that I had done wrong, I know that that would have been such a challenge. I know if there was something that the doctors hadn't caught or noticed, or, that there was some malpractice going on, I know that would have been very hard to reconcile. And just not knowing what it was, I must admit it did take a long time to come to terms with it, because at times I felt like, well, if this was, really my child and meant to be in our family, why wasn't I prompted to get some help, to find some resources, to have her be a part of our family? And then I can look back and just know that it was a completely mortal experiences, being here on earth and being subject to things that we don't have any control over, but that because we're here, it happens, things just break and don't work right. And yeah, I guess to answer your question, it did take a lot of time to reconcile, but in a way I felt comfort in the fact that there were no answers as to why.
Okay, thank you. Tell me, so you mentioned you'd had the 5 baby showers. What was it like going home empty-handed and having all that you needed to take care of her?
It was challenging. I would say, after we spent the night in the hospital, and the mortuary came and picked her up around, like 2 a.m. We got to have her for as long as we wanted, and then we had them come take her. And I know they do it differently now, but it just kind of was the norm. And we had lots of friends and family stop by the next morning, and they then discharged me. My husband had gone home earlier that morning to shower and to come back, and he had taken the cradle and placed it in her room out of our bedroom, and he had cleared up all of the extra presents and any kind of baby paraphernalia, and he stuck it in her room and closed the door. And it was more than a day before I could actually walk into the room where she would, where she was, her room. And it was just really quiet, really, really quiet. I think we had the TV on a bit. We had a lot of people stopping by to drop off things, but just empty-handed. Empty-handed is a good word to say, because we just didn't have anything to show for what we had just gone through. That 24 hours before, there was nothing except a funeral to plan and a baby dress to try and find to have her wear. Both really like overwhelming feelings at the same time.
Definitely. So tell me a little bit about how you navigated those first few days, first few weeks, especially with having to also deal with all the postpartum stuff, and any advice you might have for other mamas who are faced with this.
Well, so those first few weeks, things were, that first week was really busy, planning a funeral, doing the funeral, and family had come to town. And then it got really quiet because my husband James went back to work, and I would just wake up in puddles of milk, like so much milk. And I would say that was one of the more challenging situations, where I wore ice packs all the time, and it took 2 or 3 weeks before my milk stopped producing and stopped leaking everywhere. And that was just such a very physical reminder of what I wasn't doing, taking care of a baby. I had so many people checking in on me. My mom would stop by. I had one really good friend in our ward who I guess you could say was kind of assigned to me. And she really took the calling to heart. She came and over 6 months, we planted daisies in her memory. She would always ask about her. She would just let me ramble. My parents had started looking for some mountain property, and they kind of let me become part of that search, and it was a good distraction. But there were just times where big waves of grief would hit, and I would just find myself back in bed. I had originally planned to give my resignation from teaching right after she was born, and I had it ready, but I decided to use the opportunity to finish out the year. She was born in March, so I went back mid-April and I taught until the middle of June. And that was, I looking back, it was just the structure I needed to continue functioning, even though when I did go back, it was a really, it wasn't as it once was. There wasn't, I guess I didn't have the vigor and the vim of teaching that I had before. And so I just didn't plan to go back to teaching the next year. And I sent in my resignation. We planned a cruise, a little sad our baby died cruise. And it was a good cruise, but still, again, just kind of heavy. We met some really endearing friends on the cruise that was not of my faith, but seemed to have a lot of, understanding and consoling sentiments. And that was, I would say it just felt really long, because in the end, we ended up getting pregnant about 6 months later with our second daughter. And, but that 6 months seemed like 10 years. And I think that's, the advice would be just, stay busy, take it one day at a time. And a lot of people will call me now and say, what can I do? What can I give them? And I'm like, a clock, which is so not very sentimental. But that's one of the things that I absolutely know helped, was just time passing. It didn't seem as intense.
You mentioned the word structure. Structure was good. And one thing I know about grief is 30% of your brain shuts down. And the part that is, used to organizing and making decisions, and that's like no longer what it was. And so I think that, that whether you realized it or not, it was wisdom to go ahead and go back to work. It might not be right for everyone, but planning a trip that, still was, there was sadness there, but always planning something and having something to look forward to, I think is so great. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. You've mentioned to me that you went through the anger stage of grief. And could you just share a little bit of what that looked like and how you were able to navigate through it? Because you're clearly not, you don't seem angry now. You moved through that.
Okay, so I would say one of the things, I'll just share three things that just really roared up. One was this intense feeling of, this is just my thought process. If Heavenly Father, if God knew me, how would he think I could go through something like this? And I really questioned his knowledge of me. I don't think he knows me. I don't think he knows that I'm not capable of going through something like this. This just seems so incredibly unfair to go through all the work and then not have a baby. And I know that in the end, he knew that I would have to go through it, because I did. The second thing was that I remember going to the grocery store, maybe like, a week and a half after, walking around, and I kept looking at everybody else's faces. And I kept thinking, I wanted to stop each person and just scream at them. What happened to you? You probably had something really terrible happen to you, and nobody can tell because you're just walking around a grocery store. Do you want to know what happened to me? Do you want to know what terrible thing happened to me too? And people don't go around walking around grocery stores doing that. And I know it was just real intense anger and frustration. And but I think also realizing that, every single person out there has probably gone through something really hard, whether it's loss or abuse or, something challenging that they didn't have to begin with. And yet we all still proceed forth, if that's a way to say it. The third thing I'd love to share, and this was anger, but also healing, is that I had so many dreams after of me reacting in so many various ways, from the knowledge that she was going to be stillborn. I had dreams of just screaming the second they told me that she wasn't alive, of just sobbing, of ranting. And then I would go through the process of having her all over again in these dreams. And I'd wake up just so upset. And so I kind of interpreted it as two things. One is that, I'd already really experienced the very worst thing that could happen in that situation. And to relive it and to keep dreaming about it, it didn't really help. It didn't help to just relive it in my mind again. It would just make me so sad. But then I turned those dreams around, and every time I had one, I just validated it. Yes, if I hadn't been in shock, if I hadn't been my regular upbeat personality, I probably would have reacted that way. And it was a way for me to just grieve, and really, have the experience of what it would have looked like had I not been completely just flat out shocked at this situation. Because I remember, like, in the hospital just being really kind to the nurses. Oh no, it's okay, I'm fine. Oh, it's fine. Everything was going to be fine. And it really wasn't fine for a long time. And they say that that's definitely one of the grief stages, is just like, you're just nice to everybody. Oh, don't make a big fuss. Everything's fine. And so being able to dream those dreams and just reacting how I would have reacted had I not been so in shock. I feel like that was anger, but then also a release of, the true emotion that happens when such a loss has happened.
That is really interesting. I've never heard of processing in that way, but such a gift, really, for you.
Really, right? Because I would love to relive it and go actually scream and rant about the situation, and you can't go back. But being able to dream it and actually have a proper, I feel like, a natural response to grief.
Yeah, definitely.
That's
And
very
it's so important to not resist when feelings come up. And yet, you're the nicest. And I was the same way with all of my nurses and everyone involved. Just so nice, because I'm supposed to be. I got to worry about, everyone else and how they're feeling. And so to be able to get it out, even if it means through a dream, what a blessing to be able to do that. And for you to recognize, that's awesome. That's awesome. Tell me what tender mercies you saw through, and some notice them before their child passes, as well as after. They'll look back and say, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for this. Or did you see any through on the day of her birth, or even past? What have you seen? And I even see them now all these years later. So just maybe 2 or 3 examples of when you've seen tender mercies.
One is that my grandpa was able to speak at her funeral. And he just basically said, there will be more children. And that was such a tender mercy. It had taken us a long time to get pregnant. And the pregnancy wasn't very easy. We thought we were cursed. Would we ever have a family? And so that, I feel like that was a really tender mercy. There was some generosity that just blew us away. I was working, at the school system, and I had a really sweet, student with cerebral palsy, and I got to know her mom really well, because she had an aide, and it was all very trying to just keep her incorporated in class, but because of her severe limitations, it was hard. And the day of the funeral, her mom just came up, and her mom was just crying. She handed me an envelope. She's like, family, I just know they need this. And she gave me a card with $100 in it. And I knew her family, and I knew that they could certainly use $100. And I don't even remember what I spent that $100 on, but I just remember that generosity of like, oh, that's so nice. There were expenses, and I would say that's another tender mercy, is that, we didn't have to pay for this pregnancy. We were double insured. And I know that doesn't happen to everybody. I've had friends that, their baby's had passed away, 6 months before, and they still were paying off the hospital bills of having the baby. And I'm thinking, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that, right? The financial loss as well as the physical loss. And then also just with the promise of, that we would, in my church, there is this promise that families are eternal and that we'd see her again. And so, anytime I saw a little Daisy, I think of her, the dress that she wore for pictures with me had little teeny tiny daisies on it. And I just kind of associated that with it. And she wore a little gold ring in a lot of the pictures. And then I have that little gold ring on a chain, and I usually wear that for every holiday and anytime that I really want her to be part of our family. Every family picture, I wear that same necklace. And I feel like that's a tender mercy to have something kind of physical, but so small and not, it doesn't announce to the world, but it really comforts me.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Tell me, are there any traditions that you have where you involve your family to kind of keep her memory alive?
So there's one that we did for a long time, is we would meet every year at her gravesite, and we would release however many balloons that she was old. And we did that up until she turned 20. And then it seemed like kind of irresponsibly, environmentally, to release more than that many balloons. So, and then we would just meet at her gravesite and clean up the grave. We live maybe about 45 minutes from where she's buried now. And so we don't get there more often than once a year, but for that first year and for the first 5 years, we would go there very frequently and sit and take pictures by it and just sit there knowing that, her physical body is there, and we could feel close to her. And this one's kind of silly, but James and I did some marriage counseling and grief counseling right after. And it was the office that we would go visit was right behind a Marie Callender's. And as you know, when processing grief with any kind of therapist, it's a very challenging situation. And we would leave the office feeling so sad. And we felt like, let's just go to Marie Callender's. And we got a piece of raspberry pie every time and ate it. And after we ate the pie, we felt fantastic. So we stopped going to the grief counselor. We joined a support group. And then every year on her birthday, I bake a Marie Callender's raspberry pie and we eat it and just feel so much better compared to the grieving process. I don't know if that's
I love it.
A tradition, but it's something we do. And it's something easy to do, to just remember her by.
Definitely. Well, and then the little necklace that you wear too. That's a sweet thing to have for every family picture. I love that. And special occasion. Can you share how your Savior helped you throughout this experience?
I would say there was just an enabling power that came, because we were still able to attend our services every week. And we were still able to make it through all of the holidays that seemed really challenging. And to me, I would think that, and now I can see it, he of course would want me to be by everybody who loved me, my family, my church family. And he would want me also to continue to remember the covenants that I had made with him, which I was able to do. And I can only really attribute that enabling power, because there was definitely times where I was just not connecting, but physically was there. And I would say that was definitely support, because it really wasn't me. It wasn't me. It was him.
Right. Oh, sorry. I lost you for a sec. Can you see me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry. Okay, tell me what your life looks like today. You mentioned you've had 6 more children.
Yes. Yeah, it just looks so different than I ever thought it would. And I'm suspecting that's how parenting always is. One of the things for a long time, when we had all 6 kids at home, it was about 3 years before our oldest daughter went to college, and things were very, very intense. And our oldest 2 children, our oldest daughter Adelaide and our oldest son Benjamin, both had some intense mental health challenges. Benjamin's on the autism spectrum, and Addie struggles with chronic migraines and chronic heartburn, and both of those are definitely connected to stress and anxiety. And there were times where I was really challenged at parenting them, and I would think, but you wanted kids so bad. You really fought hard for these very challenging kids. And so I can't tell you how many times I have thought that since, that we didn't really realize what we had lost until our first daughter was born, and we went through some secondary grief where we missed the first smile, we missed the first words, we missed the first 6 months of just intense development and rolling over and walking and talking and dancing and singing and all of that. We could have done that with her, but now we're doing it with our first. Her life now is really busy, but we do definitely want to make her a part of our family. It's really busy. Not as busy as it was 5 years ago when all 6 were at home, but still pretty busy. And it's a little more chill too. It's not as intense just because all the kids are. My youngest now is 8 years old, and my oldest is 20 on a mission. She's doing missionary work in England. So definitely different now, but so good. So good.
And I think that you're an example here of life does go on. Life continues, and you can find joy, and you can find peace. It'll come.
Time helps. Time helps. And as much as I didn't want to be around those that loved me the most, it was surprising how much that presence did help. Friends that would stop by, I'd be like, oh, again. But then they left, and I felt loved. Surprisingly, I felt loved, of course, because they came with such love, right? And time really helps. And then just the mortal experience continues.
Yeah, it does. And did you have a hard time seeing babies after you lost Charlotte? Like, what was that like?
It was really tricky. My very, very first Sunday back at Relief Society, it's a church meeting. I was sitting there, and everybody was on it. Everybody was holding their breath. And there was one girl who just in her best intentions, she stood up, she walked over, and she got a little tiny baby from one mom, said, here, let me borrow this baby. And she walked over, and she just set her down right in my arms. And this was, 2 weeks after we had our baby. And I would say it's a little traumatic. It was very traumatic because I held her for the rest of the meeting. And then afterwards I gave her back to her mom. And then I went home and just sobbed. Why would she do that? Why would she just draw all that attention to me that I didn't have a baby in my arms? And here, you probably need one in your arms, even though it's not your baby. And also just realizing that she was just trying to help, right? She just felt like it was, if it was her, she probably would have wanted a baby to hold, even though she didn't have one. And being back, there were some really challenging moments of just intense anger, intense grief, and comments where people just didn't know what to say. I remember when we found out we were pregnant with our second, the grief support were like, well, you can't really replace one baby with another baby. Just getting pregnant again really isn't the answer. And I try and process that. I know, but we were so ready to be parents. We're still ready to be parents. We can be parents and still process grief.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that I've learned about losing a child is you have all this love that you either were ready to give or you had been giving. And so you do have to find a place to an outlet for that. And I mean, I had several at home still, and I just poured it into them. But I think that getting pregnant again, it's true, it doesn't replace that child, obviously, but I think it gives a place for that love to go and just to keep living and growing your family. My last question would be, and you've kind of given a lot of advice, anything additional any advice specific to mothers who have lost a stillborn baby?
Okay, this might sound weird, but if anybody asks you how many kids you have, you can always just say, include them in the number. And if they ever ask further, um, explain the situation very briefly. Well, my oldest was stillborn. It was kind of a shock. And she was born right at 40 weeks, but she wasn't alive. So we buried her and we continued living. And now we have 6 healthy kids. And I would suggest doing that because even though it's hard to bring it up, and a lot of times it immediately is a downer, right? Who wants to hear about a dead child? It really validates that they existed, that they were part of your family, they are still part of your family, and that even though their physical presence isn't here, there was a presence, there is a presence, that they exist. The other thing is that, I don't know how it all works out. I feel promised that I'll be able to raise her, but again, I feel like she's an adult spirit, that we're just really good friends. So how does that work out, being raised an adult spirit? I don't know. So take comfort in that we'll have her as part of our eternal existence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so grateful you brought that up. In the beginning, shortly after we lost our son, I felt so uncomfortable saying we had 7. And I felt a little uncomfortable because I felt like we were leaving him out. And then I felt a little uncomfortable when I'd say 8, because like you say, well, how many of this, how many of this? So I find that I can give quite a bit of information without going into the whole thing. But I have noticed that when somebody is asking and figuring out, well, where's this, where's the 3rd boy? I'm in a place now where I can share some of the way he's blessed our family. And so I think that's gotten easier over time.
For sure.
I don't get so emotional. Sometimes I still do, actually, but I think that absolutely they are part of our family and should be recognized as such. So, Nora, thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing your story, and I just wish you all the best.
Thank you. It was a pleasure talking about it. I really hope it helps.
Thanks, Nora.